Yeah, hello everyone, I'm John Medland. I'm going to be talking about sort of diving into open source. Yeah, that's my Twitter handle if you want to tweet, and I'll be posting a link to the PDF version of these slides in the Discord after the talk. So you don't have to take screenshots, you don't have to take pictures, but you can if you want, I don't mind. So I'm going to dive in with our giant, our female starter. So I'd like to highlight Dame Stephanie Steve Shirley. So in the 1950s, she worked on computer development, lots of both sort of building up computer systems in those days and the software, especially developing applications for like sort of UK government type roles. And then by the 1960s, lots of people at organizations had sort of thought, hey, this computing stuff's really important. We maybe don't want women doing this. And that was the sort of sexism that she and lots of her female colleagues faced. So that led her sort of to being essentially let go from those roles. And she established her own freelance software company, and so essentially sort of sold the software development services back to the places that had let her go. That's where she adopted the name sort of Steve, so to try and avoid some of the sexism she faced. So her company worked on many key systems over sort of 30 years, including the software that ran the Concorde black box recorders. And then in 1993, she sort of retired to focus on her philanthropy work, and she's still doing lots of important work in that field now, supporting a range of different developers and good causes. So yeah, there's lots of, she's appeared on podcasts and videos, so if you're interested, do go and search those out, please. So my motivations for this talk. So it's early March 2020. I was pretty fired up after GDevCon 2. I think that was in September of 2019. Yeah. And the LabVIEW Community Edition has been freshly minted. It's just come out. It's the first version of LabVIEW that we had that was free to use for the non-academic, non-commercial purposes. And I was thinking, wouldn't it be great if 2021 was the year of open source for G-code, when we could all start embracing this community edition and start releasing loads of like software tools and sort of LabVIEW plugins, if you will. Yeah, I think I should do a talk about it at GDev, so I sort of submitted my application and was luckily accepted and super excited to go to CERN. And then, well, didn't quite go to plan. So, where are we now in 2022? Well, I think it's actually, been pretty good. Those past 2 years, we've got lots of new tools have appeared. There's lots of new contributors and sort of contributions into the community, which has been great to see. And there are sort of new organizations and new ways of connecting. So certainly the opportunity to attend online user groups and other special sort of online events that we could attend sort of safe in our homes was really great. And I really appreciate everyone who organized those things during those 2 years. You really sort of helped me feel connected to the community, even though I was stuck at my dining table, So is it all good? Well, I mean, I maybe like other people, I'm a little concerned about some of the changes around LabVIEW licensing and costing. I worry it might sort of stifle the community growth that we've been seeing over the past couple of years. But I guess we'll sort of have to wait and see how it goes. But yeah, hopefully it won't have too much of an impact. So I'm just going to dive right into the material now. So we're going to start with what. So I think when we're talking about open source software, it's good to distinguish it from free software. So I mean, when you're using other people's software, it's all about licensing, right? It's like what you're allowed to do with it, how much it costs, and so forth. So with free software, you have a license to use it that costs you nothing. That's great. I appreciate lots of free tools that are out there. But when it comes to open source software, it's a bit different. So as well as obviously the software not costing anything to use, you're also given the ingredients, the things that make it up. So that's typically obviously the code itself, but maybe other design work and information, documentation, and so forth. And as well as being able to look at that code, you can modify it, you can distribute it as you want, you can make changes and distribute your changes along with the code. So yeah, that's the sort of the key difference. It's just obviously much more open, I guess, hence the name. So I'm gonna start with some whys, and it's 4 whys in this case. So why you should use open source software. So I mean, the first one is sort of common with all using anyone else's libraries, is that being able to bring in quality code that you haven't had to write yourself is going to save you programming effort. I don't know how other people are, but it's really hard to estimate how long things will take. Things can change in a project, so knowing that you have some good quality libraries out there that you can rely on so you can focus your effort where it needs to go is really great. And then, what open source adds to that is the freedom to study, modify, and extend that software. Like, you say you shouldn't reinvent the wheel. The library you bring in is a wheel, but maybe it's not quite the right size, or it needs more spokes, or a different color, or whatever. You have the right to understand how that wheel was made, modify it, do what you want with it, and yeah, I think that's another really great asset a facet of open source software. And then finally, I think it's a great platform for community collaboration. Lots of the things we're building now are sort of outside the scope of individual developers or even small organizations, which there are a lot in this community. So being able to have a means by which we can all contribute to code, and you don't have to worry about the legal overheads of who owns what and how we're going to all distribute it. We can just sort of all create things in an open way for the benefit of everyone, and that's I think that's really key. And now, why shouldn't you use open source software? One of the main things when you're using anyone else's code, or code you find online or you get from a supplier, is you're sort of managing that external dependency. How are you going to make sure that the person using your software has it? How are you going to make sure that when you onboard new developers or set up a new computer that they have the software they need? You're all managing those dependencies. What if the supplier of your software gets hit by a bus full of winning lottery tickets or whatever? They don't make the software anymore, and you've no idea how it works, but you just relied on it, and now your system itself is stuck. But it was a bus full of winning lottery tickets, Fav. That one was for you. Right. The other thing is software license requirements. It applies to commercial software as well, but you're bringing in software that you have to make sure that you're meeting the things you've agreed to in the license. And then finally, is you might have some employer policies, and maybe if you're developing for some customer, they might say, sorry, we just don't do that here. We're like, it's not worth it for the legal trouble or whatever. So that might be a roadblock to you using some of these open source systems, tools, software. And now I'm going to say, why should you publish your code as open source? So you probably got hard drives with loads of cool code on. Why should you put it in an open source sort of package and give it to the world? Well, I mean, I get to see it. I work at a university where even using Windows is odd. So if you come along and talk about LabVIEW, people are like, what on earth are you talking about? We like Linux, we like Python, get away with that other stuff. So it means I don't get to see much other LabVIEW code out in the wild. But I really like it. Like, it's how I've learned lots of things about using LabVIEW. There's loads of different ways to skin a cat, and it's nice to see what approaches people have taken. I'm sure there's a more vegan-friendly version of that, but I'm afraid nothing springs to mind. Feed a cat, maybe? I don't. Yeah, okay. I'm getting bogged down. I think if you're publishing your project or some of your code as open source, it sort of encourages maybe approaching a more modular design. You're sort of thinking, well, I don't want to release all the code I've got. That's too much stuff, and there's some sort of proprietary stuff in there. But there might be like a nice communication library that you have that would actually be useful for other people, and that's going to encourage you to sort of package that up and keep that in a modular pattern in your design. And it's probably also going to encourage you to make some better documentation. I'm sure, like, as we all do when we're coding, we're like, I know how this works. It's all fine. I know how to install it. It's easy peasy. And then, a year later, you have to reinstall Windows, or your laptop breaks, and you forget that you're missing some dependency. It's a nightmare. So having that thing that encourages you to do better documentation at the time is all good. You get that warm glow from helping others, and even if you're not helping others, you may be just showing off. That's quite fun. Like you're probably a really smart, really good programmer. You write beautiful code. Like you wanna show it to the world, right? So that's why you should publish your code as open source. And the final one in this section is why you shouldn't. So I think the LabVIEW community is like a really good, friendly bunch. But much like anything on the internet, you're gonna encounter inconsiderate community members. I haven't encountered that personally, but I'm a straight, white, cisgendered man. So unfortunately, not everyone's experience of the internet is as welcoming as mine is. So that is one issue. Again, your employer or customer might say, this code is proprietary, or we don't want to risk it accidentally leaking something that we don't want out in the world, so it's not going to work. And finally, maintenance burden. So when you release something as open source, it can feel like you have to sort of, especially if it becomes quite popular, sort of put lots of effort into maintaining it, keeping it up, sort of trying to devote lots of time to it, especially if you feel the pressure from the community. And I think that can be an issue, certainly. It just sort of depends how you feel. You're sort of giving something out to the world, and sometimes people don't accept it as you wish they would. Where are we gonna look for our open source code? I live in Manchester, in the northwest of England, and there's this quote from Anthony Wilson. He was sort of big in the Manchester music scene in the 80s. And he said, he had a quote that says, "This is Manchester, we do things differently here." And I think there's something similar with LabVIEW. So where lots of other software languages, Python, JavaScript, Rust, whatever, have sort of have one central repository where most community code lives, LabVIEW, you're gonna have to go hunting. So obviously, quite recently, we've had gCentral, and they do a good job of pulling in packages from the sort of VI package manager repository and the G package manager repositories, so that at least you're not having to search those two sources individually, although I will often just sort of start with VI package manager and take it from there. You've got your hosted Git sort of platforms. Really there you're just sort of playing search buzzword bingo. You're trying to put in the thing that you need and then the word LabVIEW or VI, or that like there's going to be some key phrase that you think will probably land it for you. And then there's also the Lava code repositories, which has loads of great stuff on, but I've never actually delved that deep into just yet. But yeah, so it's not just as easy as going, install from this source. You've got to kind of go hunting for it. Then when it comes to publishing your own source code, so what I would suggest, if you have a library, look at hosting it on a Git repo online. That's probably the easiest way to distribute it. If you're going to be maybe accepting issues or bug fixes from the community or other sort of upgrades, then those sites work quite well for that. In fact, that's literally what they're designed for, so that would be where I'd go. And then, you might think people will magically find it on GitHub, but they probably won't. So, put some links on social media, your Twitter, your LinkedIn, whatever, and go to user groups or attend them online and give talks about it. That's probably a good way of getting word out. And then package your code and submit it to VIPM. Is like the vipm.io website where they host community packages is probably, I think, the easier route. There are others, I guess. I've not played with GPM, so I've not sort of seen what that process is. But yeah, then other people can find your open source code more easily. I think last time I checked, most of these places that I mentioned before don't have a sort of way of filtering out open source versus just sort of free tools, which would be nice. So you just have to sort of check when you find a package what license it's released under. And yeah, then, of course, you do these things, and then something, and then profit. So it's all good. It's all gonna work out great. And now we're going to talk about how. So I sort of have a basic checklist when it comes to using open source software, and it's just sort of 2 points. One is the license compatible with what you're doing? I'm going to take a little segue into licensing soon, but you just need to make sure that how you intend to use that open source software matches with what you're allowed to do with it, right? If not, there could be trouble ahead. And then the other thing is the code quality good enough for what you're doing? So, like, code quality exists on a spectrum, right? You've got just some ropey sort of code that you threw together and maybe think, well, it might be useful. I'll just put it on GitHub, who knows? And you find that you think, oh, that could actually work for what you're doing. If you're developing a little side project or it's not really that serious, then, and you've got a bit of time to commit to that, to sort of getting into it, then maybe that's fine. If you're controlling some mission-critical system, you're going to want to look for a better, higher level of code quality before you integrate it into stuff. So I'm now going to take my little sojourn into open source licenses. These are just 3 of the common ones. Whenever you Google any of these topics and you sort of find maybe sort of Stack Overflow or sort of similar posts, they always come with these little caveats, so I'll just throw them in as well. Firstly, I am not a lawyer. This is not legal advice, and different locations will have different rules. It basically means, if what I say here isn't right, then I'm very sorry. But, please don't take what I'm saying as gospel. I think that's the best way to put it. All software licenses sort of fit in this model where the software itself is copyrighted material. By the essence of you creating it, you own the copyright. You don't typically have to apply for anything. And then what the license is going to do is control what you can and cannot do with that material. It's like, you hear a song, or a band releases a song, and you think, oh, that's great, I'll put it on my YouTube video, but they haven't given you permission to do that, so you're in breach of the copyright. It's the same sort of deal. And then if you break the terms of the license, then you're sort of breaking copyright rules. So there's various things the copyright holder can do to seek redress, financial. There might be other penalties depending on your, what the sort of law is in the place where you live. Just a couple of common open source software license types. I'm just going to sort of cover two different types. There's the permissive license. That's used things like the MIT license, the BSD 2 or 3 clause, or something like Boost software license. So those licenses, they're called permissive because they sort of say, hey, you can do what you want with this software. We offer no warranty for its use, as long as there's, maybe you have to acknowledge it, and they'll sort of say, oh, please, you have to acknowledge this software on your help page or about page or something that you use it on. And then you get the copyleft sort of family of open source software licenses. The ones that you might have heard of are GPL and LGPL, and other ones are Eclipse and Mozilla to some extent. So going into those licenses a bit more, they're quite interesting because what they do is they impose conditions on the software that you've created when you come to distribute it. And by distribute, what they mean is you take the thing that you've built that uses that software, and you sell that to a customer or you give it to a customer, someone outside your organization. That's what they mean by distribution. And when you do that, you'd have to provide your customer with all the source code that you have. That's the only way that you could be complying with the license, the copyleft license. But as I said, if you're sharing software inside an organization, it's not distribution. So maybe you have some build tools that use some open source software. You have a bit of your own secret source in there that is proprietary. I don't know what you might have, but information that you wouldn't want to have to give away. Then you can still use those tools without fear that you suddenly have to publish them on GitHub. So it's not a sort of deal breaker when it comes to using these. It depends how you're going to use the software. And also, you have to be a bit careful when you're using any open source software. One of the great things about these sort of modular software things is that we can sort of build on top of each other, but that means you have this long chain of dependencies, and you might find that some code you find that has one license sort of actually encapsulates other code with a different license. So an example would be you have your excellent software that you want to sell, so you have a commercial license with it. That calls some Python library that has an MIT license on it. That's great. You can bundle that in with your software. You just have to acknowledge it probably. And then maybe it calls a GPL license. So like the FFTW is like a really fast Fourier transform library. But it's under GPL. And you might think, but the Python library is MIT, like what's going on? And the thing is that because the people who make the Python library have distributed their code, they're complying with the GPL license, so that's all fine for them. It's only when you then try and package all of that up in your software that you'll be in breach of the GPL license, which affects the whole thing, I'm afraid. Right, so if you do want some free resources on software licensing, then I would recommend this book. It's by a person called Heather Meeker. She is both a lawyer and an author, and she also works at a company that sort of looks at commercializing open source software, so she's very knowledgeable on the topic. And she has this book she provides for free. You just have to go to her links page on her website, sign up for a mailing list. So I guess it's not free, it costs you an email address, but it's probably not too much to ask for a whole book. And that goes into lots more detail and explains things from a programmer's side and a lawyer's side, and sort of helps you get a good grounding for this. It's written from a US perspective, but lots of it is sort of applicable more broadly. And the other thing is, there was a talk at the GLA Summit 2020 from Oliver and Chris. They had a talk called Licenses, EULAs, and Other Boring Stuff. But I mean, it might be boring, but it's actually really, really useful and handy. So go and check that out. Also, that's hosted, or you can find that via the LabVIEW Wiki. And good work to LabVIEW Wiki for putting all those talks up and stuff from the various conferences that have happened. So yeah, thank you, LabVIEW Wiki. Right, now we're going to go back to the how topic we were looking at. So back to our checklist. And so when we're talking about code quality, you might be looking at documentation. Are there good examples of the code? Are there even unit tests? And maybe even automated build tools. That would be a pretty sweet combo. Yeah, so that's what I say. Those are things you can look for that suggest that this library is well developed and going to be easier to integrate and use and handle any bugs and issues that arise than sort of code without those things. And then when it comes to publishing, if you're going to put your code on GitHub or whatever, please include a license. I guess if you don't include a license, you're sort of saying I've left this here, but you're not you can't really do anything with it. I don't quite know how it works, but if you include a license, any ambiguity is removed. Please use one of the permissive ones, just so that I think it allows the community to get more value from it. You perhaps run the risk of, I don't know, Amazon picking up your code and using it to make another $1 billion from. I'd like to think in that case there'd be some outcry from the LabVIEW community. So, but given the sort of size of the user base, it's probably not going to be a massive problem. And if your code makes $1 billion for someone, at least it must have been good code, right? So, and then include a README. Very key. Please, in your README, include what problem this code solves. It's great if I can see how it works. Fantastic. But I really need to know when I'm just sort of going through things quite quickly what your code actually is aiming to do. The other thing is, please list the LabVIEW version that you're using. It's really frustrating if you're using an older version of LabVIEW and you download some code and it's in 2022 or whatever. I mean, obviously, you can convert it back if you have a LabVIEW license that you can do that with. But yeah, just let people know what version they're using, and if you have other dependencies that you need to install, then include that information in some way. And in your README, include if you're accepting contributions or pull requests. It might be like, this was just a throwaway project. I'm not really going to look at it, but here it is. That's fine. Just let people know that you're not really developing this library. But if you are interested in those things, then let people know and say, don't just send me a pull request, which would be like how you'd accept someone else's code into your library. You'd say, open an issue first. We can chat about what might work for the library, and then decide who's doing what. So just put that information in the README. It only has to be a couple of lines, but it makes all the difference when you're sort of looking at these things. And getting towards the end of this, when should you do this? Well, I would say now, or maybe not now, but like soon. You've got the weekend. Who knows what your plans are? But perhaps you're going to spend it poring over GitHub. I don't know, or putting your code on GitHub. So yeah, but before you do, sort of explore what's already available. It gives you an idea of what other people have done and how you might go about, let's say, documentation or something. It's just a good starting point. And then, yeah, publish some of your software as open source. And maybe you're not ready to publish anything. Well, maybe you find an interesting looking project and you think, I could contribute something. You could, maybe you've just take a look at it and say, hey, would this be, do you think we could use this for this? Would you be interested in adding this to it? Who knows? People who put their projects online usually quite like a bit of interaction, sort of discussing things. But be nice, be polite, be considerate. If you volunteer a feature, be prepared for them to say, oh, that sounds great, but could you contribute in some way to developing that feature? So like I say, be kind. And then I'm going to just do a list of shout-outs. So these are some organizations who already post their code on GitHub or GitLab, sorry, and even Hamplesoft have their new shiny walled garden GitLab version. I'm sure there's many more organizations that are doing great work, but those are just some in there. These are all links, so if you go and download this PDF later, you can click on those without having to copy them or remember them. There's also some people that have been publishing stuff in their sort of personal GitHubs. For instance, Dataflow, a mysterious character who has some interesting libraries on sort of images and audio, which look really good. And then, yeah, other people. I'm sure there's some that I'm missing, and I really apologize. One of the benefits of GitHub is that there's this sort of social feature where you can follow programmers and you can see who's following whom, and you can sort of build a network out of different LabVIEW developers. So that's kind of how I've discovered lots of little things. I might not have used any of this code, but it's all been interesting when I've taken a look at it, or there's something to learn from everything. And like I say, if you've contributed to open source, then thank you. I really appreciate it. My open source projects, fancy mentioning it. A year ago now, I developed asynchronous system exec. So that's a bit like the built-in LabVIEW system exec. You might have, if you ever use that sort of cool long-running process that prints lots of information to the console, you have to wait until that finishes to get the information. This pipes that information out as LabVIEW events. It's really quite similar to the JKI.net system exec, I think it's called. It might have the word asynchronous in there. I guess there was sort of parallel development. They released theirs, and then I'd sort of already got mine in the background running away. But I put it out there anyway. And this uses C++ under the hood, so you can build it for real-time platforms and other Linux targets and stuff. And if anyone wants to buy me a MacBook, then I can release this for Mac as well. So I'm open to gifts. And then something that I'm working on in the upcoming couple of months is augmented reality toolkit for LabVIEW. So just trying a couple of features that let you use a webcam and detect certain patterns and targets in an image, and then mix in some of the LabVIEW 3D stuff, which is not very nice to use. But you can just about get it working, and then do sort of things where you have a little model of a cow slowly spinning in front of a checkerboard. I'm sure it's useful for someone. It must be useful for someone else. Why would I have spent the time making it? It relates to other work I did. This is just a nice way of bundling up something that I did for a different project and being like, hey, this might be useful for you. So yeah, I've sort of raced through stuff. Hopefully that all made sense. And so I'm going to say thank you, obviously. Thank you to the organizers. You've done a fantastic job. This is a great location. thank you to the Sound and Tech team, thank you. If people have any questions or comments, or you want to throw out your GitHub profile, name, handle, whatever, I'll take those. And also, if I can make it show, you can get a copy of the slides there. And I'll post that link in the Discord once I get the authentication SMS sorted, and then I can log in. So there we go. Questions, comments? I can't really see people that well, but thank you very much. Anyone? Anyone? Oh, I see one in the middle, that row. Who's going to get there first? Oh, Chris is going for it.
Hello, Mike speaking here. Something what you mentioned a lot was about the making a README.
Yes.
But one of the big problems, especially in our community of open source code, is finding this open source. So always when you're publishing, please make sure also not to describe only what it does, but include all the keywords that then Google will be able to find it. Imagine how you would search for this feature. Help others doing that, because the search is difficult. That's why it is one of the things that we need to address by publishing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, you're absolutely right. Add as many keywords in as you can. Go for the search engine optimization, all the tools and tricks. Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you ever so much.
And just a small comment on another feature of the open source code. Right now, it is also a common movement in hiring people. Instead of giving them a dummy task to do to see how they are coding, there is a possibility of asking them to contribute to one of the open source projects and see how they are performing with the code there, also by contributing to the whole community.
Yeah, another excellent point. Yes, thank you very so much. I think we've got a few more people emerging now for coming up for questions. Sure. I don't know who was next. I think it's coming on to this gentleman in the front.
Hi, I was just going to say, relating to not ready to publish, if that's something that applies to some people, they should check out the G Idea Exchange. That's a part of G Central. I know there are at least a couple of us here who are on the committee for that. But it's a place that you can post an idea if you have a good idea for a tool, or it's all open source, something that you're hoping to get developed, or if you want to do it yourself, and there's a way to contribute to that monetarily, but it's a way to kind of crowdsource ideas for utilities and programs that could be helpful to the LabVIEW community.
Yeah, I think yeah, that's a great point. An excellent plug. Thank you very much. I think that's always one of the things you're not always sure if the thing that you've got is going to be useful to other people. So having a platform where you can maybe share some thoughts is a great thing. Thank you. Oh yes, yeah. So would you say is that this event's Discord? You mean, or yeah, great. Is there?
Another thing on the sharing your open source code, for vipm.io, if you don't have your code packaged, you can also post a GitHub repository. So that's really useful.
Great, thank you. Top tips.
And also, if you are, one other way to find things is please rate the packages, both on GitHub, GitLab, and vipm.io. You can give it stars and reviews, because that's another way for other people to find it, that it's useful for them.
Yeah, thank you.
Question not about LabVIEW, about human psychology. There should be some tools to educate people and bring some culture of code publishing. Because when we publish code in any language, we get thousands of very good solutions and millions of bad solutions. So did you see some methods to bring culture of community up?
That's a really great question. I'm not quite sure. So I guess for maybe like you have sort of Stack Overflow, which has that thing where the community, as questions and answers are posted, will sort of help suggest whether those are good questions and good answers. I don't know whether we could extend that to sort of a more open source model. yeah, hopefully that answered your question. Or I guess I'm not quite sure, but I think yeah, that could be an interesting thing to look at.
Just to add to the whys that you have had earlier about why you should try out this open source, I found that one nice thing with publishing open source is that you get full access to a lot of tools which are normally under licenses, and you can try it out for free in the scope of the open source project, and then you have some experience which you can then take when you want to actually use those tools. So this applies, I guess, to both GitLab and GitHub and the VIPM for that matter, and all of the common tools out there.
Yeah, quite. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think one of the things that's maybe held LabVIEW back as a platform is, whilst other languages have a means of sort of doing automated builds and stuff with Docker images or other servers, LabVIEW, because it's licensed software, is a bit trickier. So, so yeah, that just sort of demonstrates one of the powers of open source software is you can automate more things or have build tools, or as you say. So, just repeating your point, but thank you very much. I think is there more questions or comments? Do I see Sam has a hand up?
I was just going to say one thing to be aware of when you're creating open source projects in LabVIEW is you want to make it in the oldest possible version that you can if you want it to be as applicable as possible. So the new features are great and wonderful, and if you need them, use them. But if you don't need them, perhaps consider using an older version.
But thanks, Sam. Maybe we could just do a quick hands up. Who's using a really old version of LabVIEW? And then we'll do, okay, so all right, LabVIEW 6. 2014, anyone at 2014? All right, yeah, okay. 2016, okay, yeah. 2018, is that a bit more? Okay. Anyone just solely taking the plunge to 2022? They're just going for it? Okay, yeah, I mean, you know. Yeah, absolutely, that's always, you know, the issue with... The issue with the LabVIEW code being sort of tied to a version is, yeah, one of the sort of things that hamstring, that sort of, yeah, makes life a bit more difficult for us. So, yeah, and I think that might, was there one more question?
One more thing that I would like to add, that's when you're going to...
Here. Hi, sorry.
When you're going to release as open source also, you want to have your code tested. Of course, testing is always important. And this is good practice to describe how you want to test it and how you want your code to be tested and code quality and everything. You should write that so people who's willing to contribute can read there and see what you want. Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting. Yes, certainly. If you have if you have tests and stuff, it sort of makes it easier to people to contribute and for you to accept their contributions without having to click every wire and inspect every single the coercion dot or whatever. You know. Yeah. So that's a great point. Thank you ever so much. Is there one last one over here? Hi.
Sure. I have a question. I was releasing something recently and I couldn't really find a consensus about with your license text. I saw some people, they put it on the front of every VI, some people just have a license.txt that they put at the root of the repo, and then when they deploy it they put it somewhere. What's the right way, or does anyone have any thoughts about what you do here? Because sometimes, I've literally seen repos where they've said it's MIT, but you go looking for the license text and you literally can't find it. So, yeah, what do you do?
Yeah, a great question. Some people don't make it very easy. You have to find some oblique reference to the fact this code is licensed under something. I think typically I might put the sort of copyright notice on the top of each, or on the front panel of each sub VI. But it's, I think adding that copyright notice in is, I don't know, maybe well, if we can go to Fab, if she has a point.
Yeah, I was going to say that what we did for the DQMH consortium is we decided we wanted to make it easier because we know that our license is hard to find. So it is on the VIPM, when you package on VIPM, you can include your license. So we included a link to it too. And then we now have a palette VI that has an about example of how you can comply with our license. So we're not telling you to use that about, but if you want to, if you don't already have an about window, you can use that and you're already complying with our license. So whatever, if your license is where you want them to give you credit, just make it easy for people to give you credit. Because one of the reasons some of my customers don't want to use OpenG is because the OpenG VIs ask that you copy the copyright almost on every VI. And every VI is different, and the list of names are different on the package itself than the individual VIs that you use. So that makes it very hard to comply with the license.
Yeah, thank you. Great, and thank you for adding that into the DQH consortia code to make life easier. But I think we have maybe one question over the back.
It's less of a question and more of a statement.
Go ahead.
If you're going to do open source development and your intention is to be able to share it with people, then the question about the licensing becomes follow good open source practices. GitHub has published loads of documentation about the right way to do a thing. VIPM does it right. You identify a tag that says this is my license file, and then your license file has to be in that location. And you do that in the GitHub repo. Like when you submit it to the repo, there's a license file, it has to be identified. You shouldn't have to put it on every VI. Just like you shouldn't have to put it in any library if you're doing Python submissions or C# submissions. You don't have to put the license in every source code file that you stick in there. You have to identify what the license is, and then you have to call that out at the submission level so that it's easy for somebody to be able to find the file. If you don't do those things, then you're not making it easy for people to figure out how to use your code.
Yeah, thank you very much for your contribution. I think maybe that with certain text-based languages, it sort of shows sort of an older style before we had GitHub and things where people would be, oh, I just have to put this header at the top of every file and that's just what I do, it's just my starting template. So yeah, but yeah, now we have the tools, let's use them, let's make life easy for everyone. So but thank you very much. More questions?
Just to extend on that, so GitHub does have some really cool features built into it, such that, for example, if you use their standard licensing model where you select your license when you publicize a repo, it, for a start, gives you a lot of information on every single selection there already to tell you what they do and what they don't do. But then if you use sub-repos within your repo that also point to other repos containing license files, you can have GitHub report to you what the chain of licenses actually is, so there's a way of trying to figure out like all of the sub-components. But of course it relies on people to actually use sub-modules rather than literally forking or pulling the code straight into their own repo. And so my encouragement to people would be, use sub-repos where possible.
Great, thank you for that excellent tip. Do we have more? I think that might be it. If anyone has a burning question or comment, please make a loud noise. No? Thank you very much, everyone, for listening again. Thank you for essentially